Being an amazing product marketing leader doesn't happen by chance. It happens by habit. Product marketing certified leadership has been built on the back of decades worth of experience from some of the world's best known brands with one goal in mind: helping you be the best leader you can be. Crammed with real life case studies, over 12 hours worth of content, templates, exams, and more, this course is everything you need to lead with authority, confidence, influence, and innovation. Every piece of material within the 7 modules and 29 chapters has been vetted, tested, and approved by senior level product marketers from companies like Amazon, Uber, and HubSpot, serving up game-changing insights throughout. By the time you've wrapped up the final module, you'll be able to define what it takes to be a great product marketing leader, build and scale your team, understand how to successfully manage your existing team, use methods for leveraging data, know how to become the voice of the customer, understand how teams work cross-functionally, and improve your strategic thinking. The beauty of the course is you'll have the freedom to work your way through the modules at a pace to suit you. It's 100% self-paced. You'll even get lifetime access to the curriculum, paving the way for refresher sessions forevermore. Visit productmarketingalliance.com to get leadership certified and spearhead your journey to the top.
Hi, and welcome to today's panel discussion. I'm your host, Tamara Gurminski, and I'm the VP of Strategic Growth at Unbounce. Today, I'm joined by an unbelievable panel of guests who are going to spill the tea on all things category creation. Would you love to introduce yourself to everyone who's watching today?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Stuart Shingler. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Tink. We're an fintech open banking platform based out of Stockholm in Sweden. I've been there for 2 years leading that function, and prior to that with 4 years with Klarna, introducing product marketing there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Kant. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing at Zendesk. We produce customer service, sales, and engagement products. I've been in product marketing for over a decade at companies like Salesforce, ThoughtSpot, and now Zendesk. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today to talk about this topic.
Sheena, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sheena Badani. I'm Senior Director of Marketing at Gong. I specifically lead category creation and category design for the company. I've been there about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I have spent my time at a variety of high growth companies, doing business development at LinkedIn and MongoDB. Started my career out in strategy consulting. So excited to be here, and thanks for having me on the panel.
Of course. And last but not least, Cody.
Hey, everybody. My name is Cody Bernard, and I'm a Senior Manager of Product Marketing at Drift. We provide revenue acceleration software, helping businesses buy from businesses and removing friction from the B2B buying process, which we know there is a lot of. I've had my hand in everything from early stage startups like Drift to more later stage companies like LogMeIn. And I have been working in product marketing for just shy of a decade right now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I can't wait to hear your perspectives on this topic. And let's just jump right on into it. So first up, can everyone walk us through what was your aha moment with category creation? Did you set out to actually create a category, or did you just identify that maybe there was a gap in the market that you were uniquely positioned to fill? Lisa, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. So I can't say that I've had many aha moments around category creation. I think it's been a little bit more of once you get started and once you start to think about positioning your product and where you feel that it fits, starting to recognize that there's actually a hole that you need to go after. That being said, I actually say category creation to me doesn't feel quite like the right name. I think of it a little bit more like category creating, because it's such an ongoing process where it's not that you set out to create a new category and then check mark, you've done it. There's just a ton of work from, pre-launch to, post and beyond that you're constantly going through.
That's amazing. Okay, we're going to dig into a few of those topics after. But Cody, I'd love to hear, did you have an aha moment?
Yeah, I think for us, it was more like along the lines of both. We realized that there was this shift in the market, that there was an opportunity presented for us, which was this unification of revenue teams. So sales, marketing, customer success. And it was something with our previous category, conversational marketing, we were only really focusing on one aspect of it. So this was a really good idea for us to go and figure out how can we serve all of these different types of audiences when we're seeing out there that companies are actually bringing these teams together. And then there's also this other thing, and Lisa, I think you kind of nailed it perfectly, where you have this category that you create, but then it's so ongoing. You need to go and then lead the category. You need to go and then win the category. And then you get to a point where the category has kind of run its course and you need to redefine that. So what does that look like? Do you need to elevate it? Do you need to change it to something completely different? And that's at least where we were coming from when we were looking at revenue acceleration as our new category.
That's super interesting. And Sheena, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the journey started before I even joined the company. Like it started with this identification of a gap in the market. There was a problem, and our co-founders realized they had a vision, right? They had a vision that there was a better way for your sales team to operate based on reality and not based on anecdotes and opinions. And their approach was, okay, let's build a product, let's solve this problem in the market and drive that traction with customers. And once that was going, then there was a point where, hey, we have to start to get the word out more. We need to educate the market about this new way. And that's kind of where the concept of category even came up. They were not set out to necessarily create a category. It was really to build a company and solve problems. So the team actually kind of took a bet about early on into the company's life cycle of, hey, we could try to build this category ourselves and have it as a function of the CMO and the CEO, who are highly critical to the process of building a category. But they said, let's take a bet and hire somebody who's 100% dedicated to designing that process around it, because it is ongoing, as everyone has mentioned. So that's kind of how it happened. I mean, I think it's a process. It's not about building the category per se. It's about solving those problems.
I think that's a really important point. And Stuart, all right, tell us about your aha moment or how category creation has evolved for you in the past.
Maybe a slightly different angle again for me. Not so much of an aha moment as like two phases to it. Initially, Tink existed as a consumer app. First, recognizing that there was a need that wasn't being met by existing financial services and banks. So it started off challenging the banks by producing a PFM, personal finance management app, where you could handle all your finances. That required connecting to the infrastructure of the banks. And then there was a pivot moment where there was a realization that this need for consumers was something that the banks also were going to need to deliver to themselves. And we had a pivot from B2C to B2B. We realized the product was actually a platform, and we could build an infrastructure and serve data products to the very people we used to be challenging. And that combined with mega trends in the industry around the shift in legislation. Here in Europe, we have the PSD2 directive that meant that there was a shift in data ownership. So there was this opportunity for consumers to be better served by financial services, but the companies weren't there. The category didn't exist prior to this open banking platform. So there was a need to create a category that we kind of ironically was maybe triggered by being that challenger on the outside first.
Amazing, thank you. So one thing I heard from all of you was that this is not something that necessarily everyone set out to be like, I want to build a new category. What is that category? And then go found it. Everyone kind of identified that there was a customer problem or market problem that each of your companies were uniquely qualified to solve. I'd love to dig into a little bit about how did recognizing that change how you were selling your product? Because I think for almost all of the products, they're already in business in some before kind of shifting into this new category creation? Was this like, hey, we are going to spin up a second team who's going to try selling and building this separate category while we keep the main business running? Or was this like an iterative category creation process? I'd love to just dig a bit deeper into that. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Sure. So I'm happy to start. And I do think what's interesting is, hearing what everyone was saying, while there definitely wasn't an aha moment for me, and it sounds like really for any of us, there is a moment where you have to decide if you're going to go for it. And that is interesting. So, I think in my past two companies, both Zendesk and the prior company, I would say a lot of what we did was around category creation. And I remember, with Zendesk, when we were getting ready to launch our Sunshine platform, there was a big question around how do we want to talk about ourselves? And do we want to talk about ourselves in terms of sort of the traditional platforms to date, or do we want to come out with a new way to talk, a new category, right? And so we did have to make that decision. And when we made the decision to sort of go all in and call ourselves a CRM platform, which at the time no one was really using that term, we did create a bit of, I'll call it like a tiger team, to kind of swarm around and figure out what that would mean. So I do think in order to do it right, you have to, at least if you're in, for us, we were in a subset of a larger organization, we had to create the space to dedicate to figuring out what that would mean and how we were going to bring it to market differently.
Right. So it's a purposeful, intentional thing you're going to do, but it's kind of something that evolves as you go. But at some point you do actually need to be like, I'm in or I'm out.
Absolutely.
Was that similar for others here, or how did that change how you were running your day-to-day business versus how you were going after this new category?
So for us, it was a little bit of a different situation where we had a single product. The market had started to use terminology to describe what we were doing as conversation intelligence. And we were using that as well. And around that time when I joined, we were at this pivotal point where like, hey, like we do so much more than just conversation intelligence. Like we felt like we had outgrown that nomenclature. And as we looked into our roadmap, there was so much more coming down the pipe that we felt like we kind of outgrew that category in some ways. And so that was like, similarly, we had to make a call. Like, are we sticking with this name and sticking with this category that exists? Or is there something else that we should be that can better resonate with who we're trying to reach with our target buyers? And so that was kind of like that decision-making point of where we had to make a call and invest and really build out and then launch the new category.
And how important is the name of a new category? Because I've heard both of you now mention, hey, we are hearing different things in the market. We were talking about how we're positioning ourselves. And to me, that goes down to the language we use to describe, both what we're offering and what we bring to the market. Was there discussions around this? What are we going to call it? Here's option 1, option 2, we're going to test that. Or maybe, Sheena, to your point, were people already using some language and you were picking up on that and evolving that?
There was, for us, there was constant questioning it and defining what should this category be, what should it be known as, and while you want to try and be creative and maybe take some kind of ownership and put something maybe that's quite unique on it, I think that ultimately, as it's evolving, if people are beginning to form a vocabulary, in our case, there was quite a lot of legislation in place that is how people were forming their decision as to whether or not they needed to invest in the area. We realized that the category naming was something that we should not try and necessarily make too abstract. It needs to be focused around the problem that people are realizing that they have, that you can solve. And then you have an opportunity to be, I think, a strong brand in a very sort of strong solution in a very problem-focused category name. So I think it's settled with open banking for us as the category, which wasn't of our creation, but fighting against it and trying to do something different wouldn't have been in our benefit, I don't think.
Got it. Anyone else have a different perspective or a different experience in that process of coming up with a name? I know even for myself, when we're launching new products or features, the naming process can be so contentious and difficult, right? Because you want to get that balance of something that is unique, but also something that's clear and resonates with customers. And it just makes it obvious, of course, that is what it is.
Naming's really hard when you think about it, because the second something sounds good internally, it's going to stick. And with category creation, I think it's a little bit different than a feature, because that's something that you're going to be known as a business, right? Like you're going to be serving a specific group of people within that category. So you do need to kind of sit on it a little bit, test out, is this something that resonates with the market? That at least was like the case for us, because I know I've made some mistakes in naming in my past with products and features. And the funny thing about with Drift early on, this was before my time, but with conversational marketing, I know that our co-founders hated it. They didn't like it. They thought it sounded a little bit weird. And the way that it came to be was like they started using conversation-driven marketing in a lot of their copy. So everything from emails and website and all of that, where eventually customers took that and then relayed it back to us as conversational marketing. And then we realized, okay, great, we're going to leverage that voice of the customer and just go with that. And it stuck. And when it came to looking at revenue acceleration, when we just rebranded or recreated or created that new category, we didn't want to lose conversational marketing because it's still a core pillar of what we do. So what we did is we actually leveraged that underneath our overarching category. So now we have conversational marketing and conversational sales, and those two things fuel our bigger category.
I love the idea of really making sure that the voice of customer is represented in the name of the category. It makes total sense. Go ahead, Stuart. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add that you also need to be thinking quite far ahead, because initially your conversations are based around what people's current perception is, and that's based on their previous experiences. And you can get examples of, if you name the category after what the current solution is, rather than what the problem space is, it's going to be tied to something that is going to need to evolve in of itself. So you need to leave space, I think, for your own solution to grow and develop and add different products within that category, rather than it being like, what is the solution today? What are the features today? Because that will seem dated quite quickly.
Totally. And, I'm assuming if you're also thinking about category creation, you're thinking about new market opportunities, which means you also want to be speaking to prospects who are not your existing customers, right? And so voice of customer, how does that get reflected from market, from prospective customers, other markets that you might want to go after? Thinking very, future focused. A few of you have mentioned kind of the differences between, when you've named a product versus a category, or when you've brought something to market. How has the launch of a category differed from the launch of a product or feature for you? Is this something that you plan internally? Like, we are going to launch this category. This is the launch day. Here's the go-to-market plan. Or is it something that does evolve a bit more iteratively and naturally? I'd love to dig into that a bit more.
I'm happy to jump into this first. So from my perspective, it's very similar. Like we wanted to take a moment and make a splash around the actual announcement of this category. And this took months. It took months to plan, just like you would a product launch. So, we planned a few months ahead of time. We put a stake in the ground. We're having our first customer conference, which was in person at that time. And so we knew we had that stake in the ground. We kind of had to work backwards. Like that's going to be the moment where we unveil this to the world. It's not going to be the moment that the category is huge and big and thriving and flourishing, but like that's when we can just unveil it and start to educate the market about what this is. And then, kind of working backwards and building towards it, it was like all the things that you would do for a launch, right? Like we had to figure out what assets do we want to create? What is the keynote going to look like? How are we messaging and positioning this category? Who's involved? It's a cross-functional effort across the company. And then beyond the announcement, then the real ongoing work starts. And how do you drive that adoption? How do you drive the adoption of customers using that language that you just put out there? Other analysts and other influencers using that language, and hearing it from the voice of your customer, which we were able to track that through our own product through Gong. Generally, like I would say, it's very, very similar process.
I think that makes sense. What was the process like for others here?
Yeah, I would say that Well, I 100% agree. Sort of all of the activities around a launch are incredibly similar. Some of the things that stick out to me that are different are all around education, both internally and externally. In fact, there's a ton of internal education that you have to do, because oftentimes you're not using, for lack of a better term, made up words, right? You're using words that people already know in a certain context, and you're trying to repurpose them. And so there's a lot of education internally around how we're going to use these terms, and trying to think through sort of all of the ways, especially at a large organization where you have many, many different people, right? A global organization, that are going to take your sort of source messaging and positioning and translate it. And so you have to be really diligent about making sure that everyone understands, and then continuing to iterate as new use cases, new formats come up. And then once you've launched it, I think it's the same thing, right? Now you're educating a market on what this thing means, how to talk about it, your unique point of view. So I think that side of the launch is a bit different.
Right. So a lot of heavy lifting from an internal enablement perspective.
I could also, you both said education there, and I completely agree. And I think that there's also sometimes an extra layer of complexity and challenge to be aware of. Depends who you're selling to and how established they are in their thinking and the education that's needed. But in our case, I think that one of the earliest challenges we had was the industry we're selling to is hundreds of years old. Like, banking is very set in its ways. And some of our most important customers, we were needing to deal with like a procurement process and RFPs that just didn't have a box to fill in what we needed them to know about. So there was a sort of a degree of educating the industry so that they were asking the questions that we wanted to be able to answer as well.
Totally, I love that. And Cody, you're going to jump in and say something earlier.
I was going to say, I think I would probably argue that internal enablement is probably the most important thing that you need to do, at least when you're looking at creating a new category, because in the beginning, yes, you can have a big splash on launch day. You can have your press release, you can get placements in media outlets and all of that. But I mean, your internal people are the people who are going to be communicating this, and that's your biggest resource in the beginning. It's going to take some time to build up that groundswell out in the market. Obviously, if you have a really big brand, it's a lot easier to do that, but you need everybody speaking the same way. You need the message to be coming across in a very consistent way. And if you can't nail that, then a lot of the times you're going to struggle, because then you're going out to market with a bunch of different messages, and it just makes it harder for people to resonate with that strategic narrative of that category that you've created.
Totally. And how have you handled maybe internal feedback or internal questions around the balance between serving the existing customers we have today with the solution that they purchased versus this idea of, wanting to lead them to what you probably believe is going to be an even better way to solve their problems. But, if you're someone who's working at the company and you're just focused on solving this customer's problem, maybe you imagine you work in customer support and you're picking up the phone every day and they're like, we need to solve this problem. We need to build this feature. But the product marketing team is saying, hey, we actually need to create a whole new category and it's going to be called something else. And it doesn't even matter about that feature because we're going to give them this value. How do you handle that as part of the internal enablement process?
I think that, just comes down to the assets that you can arm your CSMs or your support team with, so that they know where are the gaps in knowledge with my existing customers. So if it's on the product side, if we're launching a new category, usually there's some level of functionality or product that comes with that. So you can basically enable them to be able to talk to that effectively and show what the workflows are or the benefits are of that specific thing that you're going to be delivering to the customer, so they can go proactively engage with that customer. And I think it all comes down to basically just being able to create really easy to understand messaging that you can then leverage across all of the different channels or assets that you're going to use to train your team, to train your customers.
Yeah, I would also say it probably goes to this idea that, in product marketing, what I've seen is there's always a tendency to want to launch and move on, right? You're like launch, and then you're like, what's the next big thing? What am I launching next? We know we tell someone something once and they retain 10% of what we say. And with category creation, I think that's even more important. You have to keep saying this message over and over and over again to the market so it sticks. And so, in that sense, I think there is a lot of resistance usually internally to use new phrases that customers don't understand, especially if you have a strong sales team, right? Because they're going to want to talk to customers in the language the customer is speaking in. And so I think there's a little bit of, kind of the MVP, getting started launch, where you start to talk about things, you start to get your sales team on board, and over time, you really get to then go bigger and get people sort of talking in your language. But it's very hard, I think, to convince sales and convince some of your internal stakeholders that this new way of speaking is the way to go.
I think that makes sense. So we've talked a little bit about getting traction internally, but I'd love to turn to talking about getting traction externally. Talk to me a little bit about the timeline you guys saw from the time that you had this launch where you introduced the term or the new category. How long did it take before analysts or customers or influencers started adopting this technology or this terminology rather? Was that something that came quickly, or was that a really long process?
So I can comment, we're still in that process. It's category creation is a very long game. You can't expect, or it would be very hard to expect that analysts and everybody else is going to pick up your language right away. Because you're working with other folks externally that have their own priorities. So analysts often create their own language and terminology for how they describe a category. Like that's what they're known to do. They take some pride in that. Similarly, customers, they are not necessarily using the jargon that vendors may develop and create. They have their own way of speaking. So for us, like we tried our best to just get the word out, get the terminology out, the vision out as much as possible, like in some ways, like over communicating, over inundating the message. We started to see pick up from our customers, from some industry folks that we're interacting with over the first 6 months, I would say. Initially, there was confusion. There were folks that were using the old, the conversation intelligence, not the revenue intelligence language, and that still happens today. No, they're not wrong, right? Like we can't expect that everyone's going to start using our language right away. But that's why it's an ongoing effort where we have to continuously invest, continuously educate, and prioritize.
Yeah, I think one way you can try and I'm not going to say shorten, because you're absolutely right, it's a really long game, but one way you can try to accelerate things a little bit is leaning on partners and sometimes even your competition. It's going to take a long time, as you were saying, Sheena, for analysts and I think customers to start to use your language. But if you can start to lean on your partners, and if you pick something really good, sometimes you'll see your competition pick it up. And in many ways, that's great because it's validating that this really is a thing that people need to pay attention to.
Totally agree.
I think that makes sense. And so, okay, we can expect that it's going to be a long game before everyone's adopting the terminology. What are some other things you could be looking towards to indicate that you're making, progress in the creation of the category? What would those success metrics look like?
It's a really tough question.
Toughie.
It depends. If we were talking just now about how it's a long game, you need to be embracing your partners and your competitors, and you want the category naming and the vocabulary to be sticking and picked up by other people. So a lot of the success metrics will be things that you're not actually necessarily in a position to measure yourselves. Maybe it becomes closer to like brand measurement. You want to be seeing how much keywords are being used, but not just like those that are driving traffic to you, but are maybe being used like across the whole industry. How many articles, how many references in publications are using this vocabulary, are referring to this new category, but you're not necessarily connected to them enough to be able to measure them. So quite a lot of it is probably quite anecdotal. You hear it quite often, or we do, certainly in the enterprise sales, and it's such a long sales cycle, that you do hear back from the sales team going, yeah, they're saying our own stuff back to us. more and more often. And we're getting people who, in an RFP, they come with questions from one of our competitors, and we're recognizing the terms and the words that's appearing there that's been given to them by our competitors as well. So maybe it's not such hard metrics, but yeah, ear to the ground, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence maybe.
Yeah, we track share of voice, like I think everybody does for the most part, and that's helpful, I think, in the beginning. But our biggest metric around this, at least what we were looking at, that was more on the tactical side, was listening to Gong calls. Sheena, great product. It literally, we looked at revenue acceleration keywords, right, through like a specific time frame, and then when we actually launched through to a point in time, and we continuously track that, so we can see, is this something that's being brought up on more calls? Great, that means we're doing a really good job on our marketing side, but also our enablement internally with sales and CS, because they're pushing it out to their customers as well. So that's at least how we track it too, and then obviously everything from placements and how many times we get picked up by press and all of that, that's icing on the cake.
I love that. So there's the market view, you know, share of voice, but also, hey, is our marketing being effective? When people come to me, are they bringing up that terminology? So you can almost measure like percent of all prospects who bring it up on their own, or percent that it comes up in those conversations. That's a really neat one. Lisa, it looked like you were going to maybe say something as well.
Oh, just I agree with sort of all those points. We look at a lot of top of funnel metrics. We look at sort of, you can do like brand tracker, right? And what phrases are associated with your brand. We look at SEO terms, earned media, things like that. It is certainly those higher level metrics though, versus things like revenue or pipeline. You can certainly look at what your campaigns are driving, but I don't think those are going to be effectively correlated with how much penetration into a new category you're creating.
The other thing that we did, like in some of the early days, was try to break down the initiatives in place to help build the category and track some of that, because some of the other like top level metrics will take time and it can be harder to measure. So for example, we launched a podcast that was all about revenue intelligence. So having like monthly metrics on unique listeners and downloads for the podcast. We created some assets about the category. So tracking the downloads and the click-throughs and conversions on those type of assets that are about the category. Those help give a little bit of indication and some kind of nearer term wins, you could say.
Yeah, so at least you can feel like you're making some progress, right? Amazing. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are watching today and thinking, should I be considering category creation? I'd love to hear everyone's perspective on what are those signals that may indicate that you should be considering category creation and branching off from the existing category that you're in today. Or on the inverse, what are the signals that are, hey, that's not something you should be considering at all? Oh, Stuart, I think you're on mute still.
Zoom bingo.
Life.
I was just going to say I'll go first, but I was on mute, so it didn't work. But I think there's a couple of key. I think if you're a startup, if you're not challenging, then you're a category, then you're creating one. And an indicator is often, is there a clear incumbent in place that you are challenging? If not, there is an opportunity there. And you should jump on that opportunity like 2 feet first, as quickly as you can, to be ahead of creating that category, because there's space for it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I just finished up the book, the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and the first law being law of leadership. And obviously, if you have the ability to own a category, that's great. But if you need to carve out your own niche, that's when the second law comes in with this law of category. So that I think you might not be at a point where you can win a massive crowded market. So you can go and have this opportunity to really create something new and something that resonates with other people, and then have everybody follow suit, ideally, right? Like as you create that category and as it gets bigger. So I think obviously those signals are your customers pulling you in that direction. So you can say, my customers, they see me as a resource to solve this specific problem the best. Okay, great. Let's go double down on that. And that's a way that you can carve out a niche. So just understanding where your customers want to take you, and then taking that problem and creating a vision of how you can go solve that problem, and then iterate on it and innovate on it continuously over time.
Got it.
Yeah. One thing I would say, and we didn't talk as much about it in this conversation, is, you know, the, you, there are times when creating a new category can undermine what you're trying to do, right? And so I think you have to look not just for, is there a gap you're trying to fill, but is there also some momentum in this space? Because I think that if you are completely there by yourself, it is going to be a very long and hard road to climb. And so, I've been part of launches where we've decided, it's not, the right time or space, or for a number of reasons, to go completely sort of off the reservation. And so I think looking to sort of what the competition is doing, who else is out in the market, are there other people that could sort of be part of this, an ecosystem of this new category you're creating? If so, that's a great time to, I think, make a first step, because you want some people there to help support you.
Yeah, and a couple other pointers. As we've talked about building a category, it's a long game. It's not for the faint of heart. So you have to have, resources. You have to have team. You have to have time that you can dedicate to this effort. Like, it's not going to happen on its own. If you're a small company with, stealth company with 5 folks, or, a seed company, it may not be the right time. At that time, you should really be focused on identifying the pain in the market and building for that pain. And maybe later in your life cycle where it may make more sense for that. So really having that, the ability to identify whether or not you have that buy-in, you have the resources, is really critical on this journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of your perspectives today. It was so invaluable. And thank you to everyone who's watching. Please follow all of these amazing panelists on Twitter, or check them out on LinkedIn if you want to hear more about their thoughts on category creation or product marketing or go-to-market. And we hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference as well. Bye for now.